I'm Karen MacNeil, and this is WineSpeed.com's People to Know, insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And today we're here with Chris Phelps from Ad Vivum Winery. And
Ad Vivum.
Ad Vivum?
Ad Vivum.
Oh, what is, well, let's start right there. What does Ad Vivum mean?
Well, Ad Vivum, it's, in fact, the former inhabitant of this office helped me. It's Latin derived. Mm-hmm. And so there's a verb vivere, so same in Italian, to live, mm-hmm. and vinum, which is wine.
Right.
So what I construe that to mean is where wine and life meet.
Uh-huh.
Is vivum. And ad is a little helper word that means you're going intentionally to that place, that intersection.
Ad Vivum.
Ad Vivum.
All right, yeah. I'm going to memorize that. I
Okay.
haven't tasted this wine yet, and that's why I didn't know how to pronounce the name.
It's okay, you'll be fluent.
Shortly.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, so Chris, you started your career in many ways. At one point early in your life, you started by working and in fact living at Château Pétrus. This is like, you know, going to the World Series as your first baseball game or something. Mm-hmm. I mean, how did that happen? And I mean, you were pretty lucky, right?
Yeah, I hadn't really banked, you know, it's not something you can't really plan.
Yeah.
But I finished at Davis in 1981 and really wanted to, I'm a Francophile, and that's a whole story in itself, but I wanted to spend a year or two in France. And so I ended up going to the University of Bordeaux and going to school there and taking all of the coursework in their final year of enology.
In French.
In French.
Of course, yeah.
And it was phenomenally helpful. And just, you know, after Davis, I'd had 6 months of work at Louis Martini, but I didn't really have, you know, everything, all my synapses firing for wine yet. Mm-hmm. But having gone through that academic year, I really learned so much. And then, you know, 1982, great year to be there.
Oh my God, the best year.
I mean, I'd like to say I knew it was going to be a great vintage, but I decided to apply for some internships. And one of them was with Christian Moueix. And so I turned down the other two and came on board with him for the 82 vintage. And the internship was supposed to be at Château Pétrus, but my fiance was visiting. I lost track of the weeks a bit and was late to respond. So in the end, they didn't have room at the 12 chateaux that they were operating, including Pétrus. So they said, well, give us a few days. And they came up with a property in the satellite appellation Puisigan-Saint-Emilion, mm-hmm. Called Château des Laurets, and where I had 40 fermenters and, you know, a phenomenal amount of responsibility. But it actually turned out to be better.
Yeah.
No one was looking over my shoulder. It was all what I wanted to do.
Wow.
And by the end, in December, before I came home, Christian had proposed that I be the first winemaker at Dominus.
At Dominus.
And I said no.
I don't know. It's starting to be a theme here for you.
I know. But I said, you know, I said the offer. I was being maybe too transparent. But I said, you know, the offer. I don't know if I can live in Napa for that. I'm currently broke. I want to get married next year. And plus, you know, to be a winemaker in Napa Valley, I mean, I've got 6 months experience at Louis Martini, which is great, and 5 months here, but that does not a winemaker make. Yeah. So I'd be more comfortable with a little more experience. Again, talking, like, did I say that out loud?
I know.
You know, and so he thought for a minute. He said, well, you know, in 1983, it's our first Dominus vintage, and we're making just a few barrels, and it's sort of an experimental thing. 84, there'll be much more wine. If you'd like to get a little more experience, I'll make you a much better offer. You can start a year later. And if you keep your promise, I'll bring you and your wife back to live at Château Pétrus for a winter after you get the 84 in barrel. So that's what happened.
Oh,
so actually my time at Pétrus, a lot of people think it was the first time.
Right.
But it was when I went back. So I was already engaged with Dominus, but it was to really flesh out my training, you know, in the lab, in the cellar.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah, so that's the Pétrus aspect.
Is there, I mean, you've been in Napa Valley now, though, for a long time, mm-hmm. and for a couple of decades. And is there a French, I don't know, sensibility? Is there something that you miss that only existed in a French way of thinking about wine?
So since the only old world experience I've had has been in Bordeaux, and I've been there many times, dozens of times, and lived there twice, obviously. And so perhaps the same, what I'm going to say would be true in the Rheingau or in Tuscany. I don't know, but because they've been doing things for so long, part of it maybe is the French way of living and being with wine, but there's just a feeling that it's not an affectation. It's not most often an ego statement. There's just something very genuine and grounded about what they do with wine. In fact, when you say in French, someone says, "What do?" You don't say, "I'm in the wine business." No one says that. Right. You're just in wine.
Yeah.
And
yes,
I think
that's right. I'm in wine.
It's an important distinction. And so there's it's intangible. I haven't really been asked that before, but there's just some intangibility there. And definitely I think that's not common here. I like to think that I've inherited some of that.
Yeah.
I think it's one reason women make great winemakers and tasters, is because you trust your intuition more. And in Bordeaux, winemakers really trust their intuition. I mean, they use technology like we do. Right. But they're very intuitive.
Right. Well, that's a very good point, though, because winemaking is, of course, a science, but it's also an art. And I can understand if you were a young winemaker, you might lean on science a little bit more. But at this point, when you have a number of vintages under your belt, do you find yourself being willing to trust your intuition more, even?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. When I taste grapes or I taste wine, but there's also the collegial aspect, and for me, and having mentorship. And I think both of those things have been extremely important in my career.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, when you mention Tuscany or the Rheingau, I wonder, for a person who is a Francophile, such as you are with wine, but works also in the Napa Valley, if you couldn't make wine in either of those places, where would you be?
Well, I love the right bank of Bordeaux. I mean, I really do. I really feel at home there, and probably because I went there as a young man, and it's just sort of built into my DNA a little bit at this point. Yeah. And I have great, mentors and friends and colleagues there too. So I would have to say, if I could no longer make wine in Napa Valley for some reason, that's where I would go to.
Okay. Right. Tell us about Ad Vivum and Vivum.
Vivum, I usually say Vivum.
Okay, I want to say Vivum, I think.
You may.
Okay, thank you.
I grant you that.
I'm a word person, and
Just say it often.
Okay. Well, tell us about the wine.
Well, it seems like everyone's in the wine business now, but that's really not true. There are a lot of winemakers who work for family or corporate wineries and don't have their own brand. But like a number of my friends, especially ones I went to Davis with, I never wanted to have my own wine because I know from experience how much work it is. Oh. And not just how you get your grapes and how you make your wine, but all of the minutia and the crazy regulations and laws that I think are from Prohibition days that just haunt us today and make things difficult. And Napa Valley, it's rarefied air, rarefied soil here, and it's a big undertaking, even a small amount of wine. So I'm not a big risk taker with money, and so it just seemed like such a risk. I never really thought about it. But in 2007, my oldest son was still a senior in an entrepreneurial business program in college, and decided he was going to start his own wine brand as his senior project, and he did it in real time. And he sat me down. He said, it's great. You've had a career for several decades working for family wineries, but what's your retirement plan? And I sort of sputtered and I don't know what I said, but he said, you really need to make your own wine. And I didn't right away go, oh, of course.
Right.
So that was like the first thing. And then since 1990, so this is 2007, since 1990, I've been working with a really good friend, Larry Bettinelli, who grows grapes throughout Napa Valley and is quite highly regarded now. He was looking for someone to help him do experiments because he wanted to work with clones and of Cabernet mostly, and up his game and row directions and trellising, and he wanted someone to please take a ton or two of grapes every year, and it was not commercial,
right?
But we made wine together for I took his grapes and it was homemade wine. I made it at Caymus. Don't tell the Wagners, but I mean it kind of got it done. It was but it helped him, and I discovered this vineyard in Yountville called Sleeping Lady Vineyard in 2000. It wasn't until 2005, but I was seduced by this vineyard.
What a name! How did it come to have the name Sleeping Lady?
Well, it's actually that's Larry's. Larry's the owner of the vineyard, and it was his. He had 3 children born there in close proximity, just south of the Veterans Home, and he. When he'd come home at the end of the day after a hard day of work, and the sun was just so, and he tried to point this out to me. I kind of get it, but there was a shape of a woman in repose, and he just had this feeling that she was holding his family and keeping them safe while he was gone. And he's not joking. I mean, this is very serious. I mean, for a man,
right.
He was quite emotional about it, and still is probably. And so I gave him a really hard time for not having named the vineyard Sleeping Lady Vineyard yet.
Yes.
And as a result of me making wine, I was the first winery, I believe, to make a vineyard designated wine from that vineyard. And as a result of me selling the wine in and out of state, he was allowed to trademark the name Sleeping Lady Vineyard. So he owns the trademark on that vineyard name.
And for your wine, though, you actually make it with your son, Josh, right?
Well, Josh really helps more with the business and sales and marketing for the brand, more than winemaking, but certainly we taste everything together, and he's involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is your child your boss then? Or, I mean, since he's on the business end?
Well, he has his own business, and so I actually work for him, too. Yeah. Yeah.
How's that going?
It's going well.
Yeah.
No, we're almost always on the same page, or we kind of are synergistic.
Right.
So it's a good relationship, but we help each other with our projects. But I wouldn't have done it without him. To be honest, he really. Plus, he had that. You need to be pragmatic. You need to be realistic if you're starting a business, and I had no clue. I mean, you have to form a LLC or whatever.
Exactly.
You have to learn accounting. I mean, I do everything myself.
Yeah.
So
shipping,
everything.
Shipping, yep, I can imagine. Now, when you describe, I've heard you describe wines you've made before as New World wines with an Old World sensibility. What does that mean exactly in terms of?
I was hoping you would just accept that at face value. But we've been talking about that a little bit already because. In Napa, and let's just talk about Napa, say, versus Bordeaux, because again, that's my new and old world, for the most part, experience. So I have to, bracket my answer in those terms, but it's not possible to make Bordeaux wine in Napa Valley.
Of course not.
People have tried. I really think people have tried. I even think the idea of very high density planting is not really appropriate for Napa. And there's a tendency to make big wines here, and it's relatively easy to make big, and I mean in terms of alcohol and extract. And for the most part, that's not true in the old world, especially in Bordeaux, which has, of course, changed over the years, but in general.
Right.
And having spent so much time in Bordeaux, I really appreciate wines with nuance and complexity and charm and freshness because they haven't been picked overly late.
Yeah.
So I think having this just in the back of your mind all the time, not just something you repeat here and there, but to something that I just feel all the time, it helps be able to sort of pull off this juxtaposed approach to winemaking, and and for the most, at least in my mind, it mostly works. So that said, I mean, I try to really go down this fine line between the two camps of, something that people might say, well, that's so light and ethereal, I don't really get it, or something that's overly done.
Right.
And you want the wine to be age-worthy. It should reflect where it came from. Mm-hmm. So I think I think some of the old world sensibility is trying to really grasp that. And people talk about that, the sense of place and everything all the time, which is good.
Right.
Some with more depth of meaning than others. But I think, a vineyard is trying to tell you something. And I think our job as winemakers is to channel that voice of the vineyard. I know this sounds weird, but you've probably spent time out in vineyards.
Yeah, sure.
Don't you, when you walk onto a vineyard, it's true for other types of property too, but a vineyard, don't you get a feeling?
Yes, of course.
And I think that's something to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that maybe I would have, if I hadn't gone to Bordeaux at all, maybe I would have felt that anyway, but I feel like that really sort of, worked on me.
Yeah.
And became part of my winemaking identity.
You just used a word that I've heard a lot of Bordeaux winemakers use, and fewer Napa Valley winemakers use this word in relationship to Cabernet, and that word is freshness. And freshness, it seems to me, in the U.S., is often imagined as simply being acidity. But I always have the sense that when the French say freshness, they mean something a little bit bigger and broader than just acidity.
Well, I think in France, in general, again, that means mostly Bordeaux for me, but I think Burgundy and elsewhere it's true, wine is a beverage. Mm. And yes, it's this piece of art that we put a great value on sometimes, and trying to make a statement. But at heart, it's a beverage, and it should be for enjoyment. I mean, why else would you have your choice of many different beverages? Why would you choose one beverage over another? Mm. So that implies a certain amount of freshness. And some of that is acidity.
Right.
And I think acidity probably is the basis of it.
Right.
Because we know that it's like when say a raspberry gets too ripe, it loses acidity, as does a grape.
Right. So
it can still taste good, and it can have one of that black raspberry, which actually is one of the characteristics of Ad Vivum, just being on that cusp of. But once you lose really a lot of the acidity, things go flat, and you can do this within a solution of any kind of fruit juice or many different, even food. If you acidify it, it might be lemon on something.
Right.
It opens up a whole new range of flavors. This is not news. But I think acidity is really important. But of course, it brings out the color. It brings out the flavors, the aromas. They change completely. The tannins change under different pH conditions. So I think acidity really, we say, it's not just acidity, but it's really at the core of it.
Yeah.
I think.
And that's important in Cabernet.
Yeah.
Critically
and if we're picking super late, you can try to make adjustments, but in the end, you've sort of missed the mark.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Now, when you think about your career, and you've worked for, of course, Dominus and Caymus, you're a consultant to Inglenook, what character trait do you think you possess that has allowed you to be successful?
Well, I think trying to have an open spirit. I don't know if everyone, you have to interview my wife and people I work with and for, but trying to be not closed-minded and try to get to that sense of place wherever you are, because that's going to serve everyone well. If you can try to, and it's not really, I'm not trying to convince people, but sometimes you have to help open other minds, because we can get so, with lots of things we do, we can get so narrowly focused that we lose sight. And I'm not saying I'm always good at it, but I do try to stay open and always look for things to improve upon. I don't, no matter where you are in the wine business in Napa, there's always a way to improve. Mm-hmm. And I think people have to remember that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chris. And for our complete interview with Chris Phelps, go to winespeed.com, the People to Know section. It's such a fantastic interview. You'll really want to read it. Thanks.